There are a few things in life that are definitely a guarantee. One of those is that you will eventually die. The second one is you will definitely be met with disappointment at some point in your life. Hey, thank you for turning into the Teal Jack channel. I greatly appreciate it. My name is Todd, and I thank you for taking time out of your day today to watch one of my videos. What I'm discussing today is a follow-up on a video I did about the drone or unmanned aerial system registration proposal that the FAA has put forth that will in effect end model flying within our country and the freedoms that we have to do that. And I personally believe that the federal government, by the FAA, by putting this regulations into place, if it goes through, is a violation of our rights. But that's just me. So what I'm talking about is the disappointment. And that is, in the United States, what is disappointing is that after the period of time for the population to make their voice heard to the FAA on these bad regulations, barely over 52,000 people made their voice heard. Now, I know from the past that the Academy of Model Aeronautics, the AMA, has in excess of 100,000 members. And so less than maybe a third, maybe half, and I believe stretching half. Why? Because I know of people who are outside the U.S. who made their voice heard to the FAA. These are people from other countries that made their voice heard. And I don't know what the exact numbers of them are that did that, but let's just say 30,000 U.S. citizens did it. So of the 100,000, roughly a third of the U.S. who are part of the AMA made their voice heard. And I even think that figure is even lower than that, because I know of guys here locally, some who work with my wife at her public school as educational assistants. They fly quadcopters, FPV, and they made their voice heard, yet they're not part of the AMA. They don't pay the AMA fees every single year to be a member of the Academy of Model Aeronautics. But they made their voice heard. So the actual number who are part of the Academy of Model Aeronautics that made their voice heard seems to be very low. But what is extremely disappointing is when you look back at some stats to even 2018, there were 1 million people, over 1 million people, who registered their model aircraft. And so you're telling me out of 1 million people, we could barely scrape up 52,000 people to make their voice heard on a very bad bill that will ultimately put an end to flying models. And that is extremely disappointing. What is that? Roughly 3% maybe of the people who registered their aircraft actually made their voice heard to the FAA. So I believe the FAA is going to look at that and say, look, we've got 1 million to 1.5 million people who have registered their models, and we only had 52,000 people file and make their voice heard. So, yeah, the numbers are on our side, and let's just go ahead and push forward this bill, no matter what the people said who wrote in and made their voice heard. And I have a feeling that's the way it's going to go. And so, what do I have? Extreme disappointment. Disappointed that people in the United States aren't standing up for their rights, and they're not contacting these government bureaucracies who are unelected, cannot be terminated because of the president, and they're in for life unless they retire or totally massively screw up. They're basically protected in a job, and they continue to make bad regulations that affect all of us people living in the United States, and ultimately they affect our freedoms. And this goes to the ATF and their rulings on firearms, to the list is long. It's just frustration. It's frustration that the American people can't stand up for their freedoms. And we see this diminishing within the 2A community, where you'll have people who will say, you know, I didn't use a bump stock. I don't really care. I owned one, but I never used it. So who cares if the bump stocks get banned? It's not a big deal. It's not going to affect me any. And what are we seeing? The FAA is stepping up the drum now. And they've ban certain weapons that were once legal, that were owned legally, that fit the ATF's rules on their firearm classifications. And now they've decided they don't fit these rules, so we're going to establish a new category. So meanwhile, you can't buy them, you can't sell them. And so what do we got? We got bureaucracy running rampant, which brings back to me and the disappointment of the American people that they won't stand up for your constitutional rights and you won't stand up for freedoms in the United States. You can't even take the time out of your day to write a short, brief letter to the FAA saying how you don't want this regulation to go through. Maybe you do. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the vast majority of these people who registered their drones or their unmanned aerial systems or their RC models, if you would, are willing to have these regulations where you're only allowed to fly in a small area or you have to put remote ID on it. Maybe they all think it's a good idea, and I'm wrong with my assumption in the United States that people want to stand up for freedom to be able to go fly at your local park when you choose and no longer and not have to drive miles to get to a FAA recognized identification area, or a FRIA as it's being referred to as. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they want that. Maybe they want more government control. Now, I would say half the United States, in a way, is for that. We see that with how many fruitcakes are jumping on board the Democrats and the socialist Bernie Sanders. But that's another story in itself. It's just the disappointment that people are willing to let their freedoms go away and now put more restriction on what you're able to do. I guess I'm completely wrong that people just want more government control. I believe that's what we're coming to, is a country that wants government running their lives. And we see that with the rise of socialism in our country. And it's a sad day for America to see our rights going away. All for what? Protection of something that's been safe, that has never once brought down an aircraft. And they're wanting to protect us from flying so that we cannot get into the airspace and potentially bring down an aircraft. And it's never been proven that all these pilots that are saying, hey, I saw a drone when I was flying at 300 miles an hour, as if they could see the drone at 300 miles an hour. And so I would say most of the stories are false. And what I've only been able to find is a couple of incidences where a drone actually flew into, or a private or commercial aircraft actually flew into a drone with actual evidence that it was a drone. There's only a couple of cases. And either way, it didn't bring the aircraft down. It created a little bit of damage, but it did not bring the aircraft down. And it was still safe to fly, and they still landed safely. And so we're going to put on all these regulations to protect something that is already safe, when the remote control hobby industry has an extremely long history of safe flying. And that's what I have to say. It looks like we're in the age where Americans are willing to give up their freedoms, and that is a sad day for the United States. And I'm extremely disappointed in all the hobbyists out there that are flying model aircraft and didn't take time to contact the FAA. And we'll see. It'd be interesting to see what they have to say as soon as these regulations come into play, should it come that way, which I believe it will. There you have it. Those are my thoughts. Take care. God bless, and I hope you're having a better day than I am. And we'll talk to you later.